Okay, this is question 14 on the higher non-calculator paper. Let's start reading the question first. Question 14, the grouped frequency table, so there's a group frequency table here, shows information about the weekly wages of 80 factory workers. Okay, because they've actually told me that number 80, alright, one of the things I know straight away, I could do this, but I know the total here, right, of all these numbers is going to be 80. When you add them up, they're going to add up to 80. So these are the groups, so the weekly wages, so £100 to £200, 8 people earn between that wage, and so on. Going on to part A. Part A says, complete the cumulative frequency table. Complete the cumulative frequency table. If you get a question like that, this is pretty straightforward. So what you want to do is, a cumulative frequency table is how many people earned less than £200. So less than £200 altogether, it was just 8 people. It's just that first one there. Yeah. How many people earned less than £300 altogether? Well, it's those 15 and the 8. So 15 add 8 is 23. How many people earn less than £400 altogether? Well, it's the top 3. 8, 15 and 30. And if you add those, in fact, I'm just going to add 30 to 23, and it's going to give me 53. How many people earn less than £500 altogether? So it's all 4 of these. Yeah, up to there. So I'm going to add 17 onto 53, and that's going to be what, 60, 70. How many people earned less than £600? So that's all of those, right? So adding 7 onto that gives me 77. And then how many people earned less than £700? Well, it's going to be all of them. And adding 3 on to 77 gives me 80. And now that tells me that I am correct, because the final number here is the total number that I wrote there. So it is the total number. There's only one mark for that. It is a pretty straightforward part to the question, but essential nonetheless. Okay, let's look at the next part of the question. Okay, looking at part B. Part B says, on the grid opposite, draw a cumulative frequency graph for your table. So they want me to draw a cumulative frequency graph. Now on the cumulative frequency graph, you are going to plot the upper ends of each of the group against the cumulative frequency. So I'm going to plot 200, and the cumulative frequency is going to be 8, 300, the cumulative frequency is 23, 400 to 53, 500 to 70, 600 to 77, and 700 to 80. That is what you need to do on this. I'll get the graph. The graph is quite big. It occupies a whole page. So we'll focus on the graph, and I'll get that, and we'll plot those points. Okay, here is the graph that we're going to plot the cumulative frequency graph on. It's on the opposite page, so if you're actually working on this on a paper, right, you'll be able to see the table and the graph at the same time. What I will do is I'll sort of flip between the table and the graph. Now, this column here, the heading right to the top is cumulative frequency, but I'm just going to write CF here, so you know that that's going to be the cumulative frequency. I'm going to use a pencil to plot the points, and I'll show you the graph once again. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to plot, first of all, a weekly wage of 200 and a cumulative frequency of 8. So a weekly wage of 200 and the cumulative frequency. I looked at the scale before, and every one of these tiny squares stands for 1. So a cumulative frequency of 8 takes me to that point there, and I'm going to mark it with a cross. The next point is 300, a weekly wage of 300, and the cumulative frequency is 23. So working all the way up there, being as precise as possible doing all of these. So there's my next point. The next one is a weekly wage of 400, and the cumulative frequency is 53. So that's along that line, 50. 53 is going to be there, and I'm marking that with a cross. The next one is 500, and the cumulative frequency is 70. That's all the way up there. The next is 600, and the cumulative frequency is 77. And finally, it's 700, and the cumulative frequency is 80. Okay, so I've got all the points in place, and now all I need to do is to draw the curve, the cumulative frequency curve through all of that. Now do not join them up with straight lines. It does need to be a curve, and when drawing a curve, I tend to move the paper, right, more than anything else. So I'm going to move this paper around so I can actually draw a neat curve going through all of these points. I'll do it lightly to begin with, right, but try not to have double lines, right. Make sure it's a single line. It doesn't need to be phenomenally dark, right. It just needs to be dark enough so that you could see it and you could take any readings off it if you need to. So that there is an example of the cumulative frequency curve. So sometimes a stretched out S shape, and that is my answer for part B, and there's 2 marks for that altogether. Okay, switching over to part C. The question in part C says use your graph to estimate, or to find an estimate of, the interquartile range. Interquartile range. Now, if you revise for this properly, you should know that the interquartile range, sometimes abbreviated to IQR, is the upper quartile take away the lower quartile. You need to remember that. So from the cumulative frequency graph, I need to first find the upper quartile and then find the lower quartile, and then come back here and do the upper quartile take away the lower quartile. Okay, back to the cumulative frequency graph. I'm going to try to find the upper quartile first. Now, because my graph goes all the way up to 80, the upper quartile is the top quarter, or 3/4 of 80. Now if I just sort of split it, that's halfway, 40. 20 is 1/4 of the way, and we'll come back to that. And so that means that 60 is going to be 3/4 of the way, and that's going to be my upper quartile. So what I need to do to find the upper quartile wage, from 60, go across to the graph, and then come all the way down right, and I've made a hash of that. I am going to have to rub that off. Okay, so doing this line again and making sure I followed the line. Yep, so that's much better, and that value there is going to be my upper quartile. I'm going to read that off. Now that's 400, it goes all the way up to 500, and there are 10 spaces, so each one of those spaces on the graph is going to stand for 10, so that's 440, because it's 1, 2, 3, 4 spaces in. So the upper quartile is 440. The lower quartile, that's going to be 1/4 of the way up. So from here, I'm going to go across the graph, draw a horizontal line. You need to show these lines, right, in order to get full marks for this. It should be a lot quicker in your case. Alright, so there you go. I've just picked off the lower quartile, and the lower quartile is going to be that value there. Now that's 200, that's 250, 60, 70, 80, and that's 290. So 290, that's the lower quartile. Okay, I am going to go back now to the sheet itself and make a quick note of these. If I just show you what I wrote at the bottom, at the bottom of this graph, as I was doing it, I was writing down the upper quartile and the lower quartile in each case. Okay, back to part C. We found out that the upper quartile, so from the previous part of the question, the upper quartile was 440. The graph is just below this. And the lower quartile, it was, just checking, 290. So 440 take away 290. Let's see, 10 to make 300, 100, so that's 110, plus the 40 That's going to be 150. That is the interquartile range, the difference between the upper quartile and the lower quartile. Okay, finally, going on to part D. In part D, it says, use your graph to find an estimate for the number of workers with a weekly wage of more than £530. So, use it to find the number of workers who had a wage of more than £530. Now, this is a popular type question, but we need to go back to the graph for this and remember that it's more than 530 that we're looking for. Okay, so in part C, we want to find out how many workers earn a wage of more than £530. So, going along the wages over here, 530 is that point over there, right? 530 is that point just here, right? It's 3 squares in. So, I'm actually going to draw a line up to the cumulative frequency curve. I'm going to make sure that that's spot on this time. And then across to the cumulative frequency itself. So, going across to here, what do I get at this point here? That value is, let's see, 70, that's 73. So what that means is 73 people earned less than £530. Right, 73 people earned less than £530. But if we look at the question itself, so the question in part D was this: use your graph to find an estimate of the number of workers with a weekly wage of more than 530. Now there were 80 of them altogether. Right, that's how far up the cumulative frequency curve goes, and we found out that 73 earned less than £530. So we just need to do a takeaway there, and the answer there is going to be 7 workers. Another way of actually looking at that in the question or in the graph itself is this space here. That space up there is 7. And that represents 7 workers. That's the number of people who earned more than £530. This is quite a long question, right? I took longer to do this than most, but what you need to do is to break it down, take your time. There's 7 marks altogether for this question, and this is a very popular question. Make sure you know how to do it.